Hello, my name is Blade, and today I'll be reviewing Warfare. So I know with this review, I'm a little bit behind. This movie came out like the middle, beginning-ish of April, and I did want to review it pretty much like right after I watched it. I watched it actually the day it came out. But every time I tried to compile my thoughts and opinions on this film, it was like so convoluted and all over the place, and I just did not have like a full coherent thought. So I opted to wait, and now here we are. So I am going to start this review off by saying I am aware for some this movie is a bit controversial just in conception. It's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like problematic. Like nothing about the movie or its creation is necessarily like immoral or anything. So I wasn't bothered at the idea of like paying my $5 to see it, but I did go in with the understanding that there's definitely some opinions on this movie's conception to begin with, but I wanted to actually see it for myself before I had any opinions on that. And I think in some but some movies and some pieces of media and or people, figures, whatever, it's total like rejection. Like let's not contribute to that at all. And there's some things that I think exist in this like not so black and white space, and for me that was one of those. But I understand if you're in the other camp, and as I go through my review I'm going to be mindful of that, and actually that's part of what I'm going to discuss when I get more into like probably more of the spoilers section. So Warfare is directed by Alex Garland, who put out Civil War last year, which both movies are distributed by A24. And the film is about a surveillance mission goes wrong for a platoon of American Navy SEALs in insurgent territory in Iraq. So I think it's pretty, you can honestly gather from just that description why there's a little bit of like pushback at even the idea of this movie, especially in right now's political climate. We definitely don't want to be putting anything out there that's like, "Ooh, America," like propaganda machine stuff. But before I dive into all of that, I'm gonna give my spoiler-free thoughts that are a bit, more about the actual filmmaking aspects of the movie. Quick note, I am starting something new with these reviews where I'm still keeping the spoiler free in the spoiler section, but I'm going to add a timestamp for when the my final thoughts, when I give my final thoughts, just so instead of just like leaving the video once I get into the spoilers, you can listen to the spoiler freeze and then get into the final thoughts so you can get a rounded picture without, risking spoilers if you don't want to hear spoilers. My first note, spoiler free, of course, that's a compliment, is the acting. I think overall it was well acted. The only issue being it's a very large cast. It's an ensemble cast, and when I say ensemble, it's like the beginning part of the movie we're with like I don't know, like maybe like eight or so people, but it does end up we end up with a very large group of people. So not a lot of one-on-one time with each cast member, but everyone does act well. However, there are some, I think, notable performances by Joseph Quinn, Kit Connor, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right. I did look it up, but it's been a bit since I looked it up. D'Pharaoh Woon-A-Tai, I think. I think both those both sorry, all three of those actors did really good job. Specifically, Joseph Quinn. Without spoiling anything, there is something that happens in the plot where he really has to put on his acting chops. I think he gives a really compelling performance. I think he gives a really like raw performance that had me kind of sitting there just kind of, it was a visceral experience. The whole film was really, but a particular part of the film that where he had to really perform big time. It was a very visceral experience. Same thing goes for Kit Connor. I think he did really well. His role that he was the newest guy to the platoon, to this little group of Navy SEALs, and I think he acted that out very well. There was something more fresh feeling about him compared to the people who were more seasoned. And then for D'Pharaoh, I also think he was not like the main character. There really is no like main character, but I think we follow him a little bit more closely than some of the other people, and I think he had a lot of weight in his performance as well. Next thing that I liked was this sound in this movie. This movie had incredible sound, and it goes over very, very well in a movie theater. It's definitely a movie theater movie. Not saying you can't watch it on streaming, but it definitely is best experience in a movie theater. And part of that is because the sound is great. I mean, it sounds amazing, but there's also very clever usage of silence, and on top of that, there is an opening scene that I'll get more into the opening scene and spoilers, but a part of the opening scene is that there's really, really loud music that plays, but the way that it hits, it really it had me very like gripped at the movie. I was like, okay, like I mean, there's not to say that there isn't loud music in other movies, but the way they did it was really like it really had me sat down, and I think the overall sound design in this movie was really like a high point, if not the highest point of the whole thing. So getting into the premise, still keeping it kind of spoiler free. What I will say, and I guess I can say this without even being worried about spoilers, because the description of the movie is literally kind of all we get as far as context goes. Like, there really is no, we don't know other than surveillance really like what their purpose is, and unless you're familiar with what was going on in Iraq in the early 2000s, you kind of just don't really know like what's going on. And even if you are familiar, you still don't really know what's going on. But I have a feeling that's meant to possibly be intentional, and it's kind of like a commentary on that, like what was all the conflict really for. But more on that later. I did like as well that there was an Iraq family in the movie, on top of the Navy SEALs, because I'm glad that both sides were represented, and without spoilers, it had there was some moral questions that came up involving the SEALs and the Iraqi family, and I really like that. I enjoy that they show both sides, and it was, well, they didn't fully show both sides, but like I said, more on that later. But I still appreciated, I guess, that it wasn't just from the American point of view. My first criticism I would have to give Warfare is that the characters are kind of empty. Like, since there are so many characters that we're dealing with, we don't spend enough time with any of them to feel super like to have any stakes with any of them. And I'm not saying that you don't feel bad for anybody, because I mean it's a grisly situation, but we just don't know anything about them. Like, we barely even know their names, and we hardly know anything about their personalities. Like, the most information we get about anybody is Kit Connor's character Tommy, that he's new, and that is literally the extent that we know about all of these characters. And I kind of understand why they would do that, but I mostly find that it it just, I don't know, it just, I think there need to be a little bit more character development, especially for, as I'll describe later, like the type of story that this film is. I will warn you, without, this is another criticism. I'll get like, as a lot of this movie, I'll have to get into it more in spoilers, but it does have somewhat of an underwhelming ending, in my opinion. Even if you enjoyed the rest of the movie, I find that the way that this ends does not hold the weight that I think they wanted it to, and it honestly kind of undermines the rest of the movie. But you'll have to stick around for spoilers for me to let you in on that. But I just think what it all comes down to, just you just kind of leave the theater like, you know. Right, so now I'm going to be moving into spoilers. I apologize if the spoiler free section wasn't that fruitful, but most of what I have to say, I have to spoil the movie in order to talk about it. So you've been warned. I will now be moving into spoilers. So the opening scene, specifically what happens is it starts off with an 80s like aerobics video or something like that. It's been a while since I've seen the movie now, but it was some type of workout, VHS instructional thing, and the music eventually builds, and then we cut to all of like the Navy SEALs watching this, and low-key it is a little bit like oogling at women a little bit, but I mean, I think the point is, they're out there for so long. It's probably the first time they've seen anything like that in a while, but I really enjoyed that that's the way we come into this film, because it's a war movie, so that's definitely not how you expect to come in. I think it pulls you in and the music's really loud, and then it hard cuts to silence, and there's like a couple seconds of just the Iraq setting before they start to creep in, and I liked that juxtaposition. I thought it was very it was very it did what it needed to do. I think that was very effective. And now allow me to get into some of the things that I have to criticize. So, as I mentioned earlier, there is a big lack of context to anything that's going on. And I have a feeling the purpose of that was to kind of be some sort of statement of like, but what was it all for? And like, why did the president like do all this stuff? And listen, I can respect that. It's something that Alex Garland tried to do with Civil War, and even though I wasn't a total fan of Civil War, I think in Civil War, I don't know, like in both scenarios in both of these movies, the lack of context takes away from it. Like I understand why Alex Garland is trying to not put the context, because I think he's trying to imply a lot of things, but sometimes implications don't really work. You have to take a hard stance. And in Civil War, I'll allow it, but in Warfare, I think he needed to take a little bit more of a stance, especially because I forgot to mention earlier, this was actually co written and co directed by a real Navy SEAL veteran that was in. This is based on their memories of this event. So it's not the actual story per se, but it's like based on the memories. And I don't know, it was just weird to me that even with that element, there was no like clear point of view. Like I just feel like you don't get to just like kind of come in and act like you're making some big statement when you're not saying anything at all, really. And that leads into the undermining ending, because as I mentioned, there's this Iraqi family, and essentially the Navy SEALs siege their house and take it over, and it's like a horrifying, if it was from their POV, it's a horrifying situation. And so I really appreciate that element going like as the because it happens fairly early in the movie, like probably like not even like 10 minutes in. So I was like, oh, okay, like we're kind of like taking a stance here and saying, like this is like wrong and maybe this shouldn't be happening. But then the ending of the movie is this Iraqi family being like, we're safe now. And like, I'm like, okay. The entire credits sequence is like honoring the memory of these Navy SEALs that were on this surveillance mission. And listen, I'm not saying that anything they experienced wasn't traumatizing. I'm not saying I don't sympathize with it, but it just felt a little too like rah rah rah, like America and like propaganda y, and it really just undermines what the rest of the movie was attempting to say, because it definitely does not like say it, but at least attempting to say. So I think that was really unfortunate. And honestly, the film also didn't earn that ending, because not only is there a lack of context, there's also just like a lack of anything really truly happening in this movie. All that really happens is like their location gets compromised and they have to fight for their way out of there, and then they do get out of there, and that's literally the movie. And it's also like one location, and I'm not against a one location movie. I think one location can actually be really interesting, but in this movie, it just did not. It didn't work. I'm sorry, it just did not work. So, closing thoughts. Overall, I don't mind Warfare, actually. I think if you enjoy like really immersive film experiences and you don't mind it being kind of an intense immersive experience, you'll really enjoy it. And I don't think it's 100% misguided. I see the attempt of what it's trying to do. I just think ultimately it doesn't completely work. And if you're somebody who was like weary of the glorification of war and like specifically what was going on in the Middle East, because that definitely was not something we should have been doing. If that's something you're worried about in this movie, I kind of almost don't even know what to tell you because it does do its due diligence to not lean into that and attempt to provide perspective, but the ending completely like undermines any of that. So I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag. However, I will controversially yet brave say I think I do prefer it over Civil War personally. I guess just like it's more in line with the type of movie that I would watch again. But overall, I don't know. It was just a misguided attempt, I think is what I have to ultimately say about Warfare. So those are my thoughts, comments, opinions on Warfare. I'm sorry if this one was a little all over the place and it is kind of coming out late, but as you can see from my thoughts, there's a lot going on with this movie, and I think I honestly barely touched the tip of the iceberg with what could be said about this movie. But yes, thank you so much for watching. I have, of course, another Let's Talk About coming out this month as always, and I will be posting some other content as well, so keep your eyes out for that. And if you haven't had the chance yet, my performance art film, A Portrait of Healing, just released about like a week and a half ago at the time of filming. So if you'd like to support me, consider checking that out, and I will see you in the next one.